The gallery fell silent except for the clinking of champagne glasses and the whisper of expensive fabric. Dominic Ashworth held up a small canvas, his smile sharp as broken glass. His voice carried across the marble floors like a verdict. Identify the artist of this piece, right now, in front of everyone, and I'll make you head curator of my entire collection. Laughter erupted, cruel and performative. All eyes turned to the corner where a woman stood frozen, one hand still resting on a velvet rope. She wore a Navy security uniform that suddenly felt like a prison. Her fingers trembled. She could feel the weight of 100 stairs, each one a blade. Iris Company had spent 3 years being invisible. Now, under the chandelier's merciless light, she was a spectacle. An amusement. A joke. What if I try? Her voice barely rose above a whisper. The laughter intensified, rolling through the crowd like thunder. But Dominic's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. He didn't know yet that the woman he was about to humiliate carried a secret that would dismantle everything he'd built. What began as a cruel game was about to become a reckoning no one in that room would ever forget. Welcome back to another powerful story, my beloved listeners. Kindly tell where you're watching from and what time it is where you're at. If you're new here, prepare for a story of betrayal, unexpected love, and what truly makes a family. Drop everything and listen closely. This tale of heartbreak and redemption might just change how you view love and family forever. The alarm clock shattered the darkness at 4:45 in the morning. Iris Company's hand shot out from under the thin blanket, silencing it before the second beep. She lay still for a moment, staring at the water-stained ceiling of her small apartment. Morning light hadn't yet touched the sky outside her window. The city was still mostly asleep, but her day had already begun. She pushed herself up slowly, her body protesting the early hour. The apartment was cramped, barely large enough for the mismatched furniture that filled it. But it was clean. Everything was always clean. That was one thing she could control. Iris moved quietly through the narrow hallway, her bare feet making no sound on the worn carpet. She stopped at the second bedroom door, pushing it open just enough to see inside. The soft hum of an oxygen machine filled the small space. Blue light from the monitor cast shadows across the walls. Eli was asleep, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. 24 years old, her baby brother, though he hadn't been a baby for a long time. The wheelchair sat folded in the corner. Medication bottles lined the dresser in neat rows. Iris watched him for a moment, her heart doing what it always did when she looked at him. It broke and mended itself simultaneously. She stepped inside quietly, adjusting the blanket that had slipped from his shoulders. His face was peaceful in sleep, unmarked by the pain that often creased it during waking hours. She left a note on the bedside table next to a glass of water. Instructions for Maria, the daytime caregiver who would arrive at 7. Breakfast in the fridge. Physical therapy appointment at 2. Call if anything changes. Iris returned to her own room and stood before the small mirror hanging on the wall. The woman looking back at her was 31 but looked older. Tired. Her dark hair needed cutting. The circles under her eyes had become permanent fixtures. She reached for the navy uniform hanging on the back of the door. The fabric was stiff, utilitarian. She buttoned it slowly, each button a small surrender. The name tag sat slightly crooked no matter how many times she adjusted it. Company. Security. As if anyone ever looked close enough to read it. Before turning away from the mirror, her eyes caught on something else. A framed photograph on the wall, half hidden behind a stack of books. She picked it up, dust coating the glass. The girl in the photo was younger, brighter. Paint-stained overalls. Hair wild. Eyes full of dreams. She held a certificate in her hands. Full scholarship. Blackwell Academy of Fine Arts. That girl felt like someone Iris had known in another lifetime. She set the frame down gently, face down this time. Some mornings it was easier not to look. The commute to the Pembroke Gallery took 40 minutes on 2 different buses. Iris sat near the back, watching the city transform through the window as dawn finally broke. Her neighborhood gave way to cleaner streets, bigger buildings, people in business suits carrying leather briefcases. 2 different worlds, separated by a few miles and an impossible distance. The Pembroke Gallery rose before her like a temple. All glass and white stone, angular and modern, designed to intimidate as much as inspire. She'd walked through those doors 1,000 times, but today something felt different. The air carried a charge she couldn't name. The employee entrance was around back, down a narrow alley that smelled of garbage and rain. She swiped her card and stepped into the fluorescent-lit hallway that staff used. The transformation was immediate. Out there, marble and art. Back here, concrete and time clocks. Morning, Iris. She looked up to see James Giordano leaning against the break room doorway, coffee in hand. He was the only security guard who'd bothered learning her name in the first week. 3 years later, he was still the only real friend she had in this place. Morning, James. She managed a small smile as she reached for her locker. Big night tonight. He raised his eyebrows. Dominic Ashworth himself is hosting some kind of unveiling. New acquisitions. Very exclusive. Iris nodded, pulling out her flashlight and radio. She'd heard the whispers all week. The gallery had been in controlled chaos preparing for this event. Means we'll be invisible as usual. James took a sip of his coffee. Just the way they like us. Seen but not noticed. Like furniture with pulses. At least we get to look at beauty. Iris's voice was soft. James studied her for a moment, something shifting in his expression. You really love this stuff, don't you? The art. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, I used to. Before he could ask what that meant, the shift supervisor's voice crackled over the radio. All security personnel. Morning briefing in 5 minutes. The gallery floor was a different world. Iris stepped out of the staff corridor and into the main space, and the transformation was complete. Soaring ceilings. Walls painted in perfect whites and greys. Natural light streaming through skylights, carefully controlled. And everywhere, art. Paintings in ornate frames. Sculptures on pedestals. Installations that sprawled across entire rooms. Each piece worth more than Iris would earn in a lifetime. Maybe several lifetimes. She walked her usual route, past works she'd memorized by now. A Rothko that made her chest ache. A small Degas sketch that reminded her of her mother. A contemporary piece that challenged and confused and delighted her all at once. Her fingers itched. Once, they'd held brushes. Now they held radios and flashlights. A visitor approached, a middle-aged woman in expensive athleisure, the kind that cost more than Iris's monthly rent. Excuse me. The woman barely looked at her. What period is this from? The placard should have that information. Iris gestured to the small card mounted beside the frame. The woman huffed and walked away. Iris watched her go, swallowing words that would never be spoken. She could have told that woman about the artist's connection to the Barbizon school. About the influence of Corot in the treatment of light. About how this particular piece represented a transition in the artist's emotional landscape, painted just after a personal tragedy. But security guards didn't offer art history lessons. They smiled politely and pointed to placards. Iris. James appeared beside her, voice low. Did you hear? They're bringing in extra staff for tonight. Caterers, bartenders, the whole production. She nodded. The gallery was already transforming. Staff members were arranging chairs, setting up a small stage, positioning additional lighting. This wasn't just an unveiling. It was a performance. Dominic Ashworth doesn't do anything small. James shook his head. Richest collector in the state. Maybe the whole region. Word is he's unveiling some major acquisitions. Trying to cement his legacy or something. Legacy. The word tasted bitter. Some people got to build legacies. Others just tried to survive until tomorrow. The briefing was brief and pointed. The events manager, a severe woman named Patricia, stood before the assembled staff with a clipboard and an expression that suggested she'd rather be anywhere else. Tonight's event is invitation only. 50 guests, all high profile. Collectors, dealers, journalists. She looked up, making eye contact with each staff member. Your job is simple. Be invisible. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't touch anything. Don't interfere with guests. Serve, smile, disappear. Understood? A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. Patricia's gaze landed on the security team. You'll be monitoring the barriers around the new pieces. Mr. Ashworth is very particular about personal space. No one gets close without his explicit permission. Iris felt something cold settle in her stomach. She didn't know why. The day crawled by in a strange suspension. Iris did her rounds, checked barriers, monitored cameras. But her mind kept drifting to the evening ahead. The staff gossip had reached a fever pitch. Did you hear he once fired an assistant for mispronouncing an artist's name? I heard he can authenticate a piece just by looking at it. My cousin worked one of his parties once. Said he made a waiter cry over a smudged glass. The stories painted a picture of a man who wielded power like a weapon. Someone who didn't just collect art but collected moments of dominance. Proof of his superiority. By 6 in the evening, the gallery had transformed completely. The lights were dimmed in some areas, brightened in others. The new acquisitions sat on pedestals under dramatic spotlights, still covered with black velvet cloths. Waiters in crisp white shirts arranged champagne flutes on silver trays. Everything gleamed. Iris changed into a fresh uniform, made sure her name tag was straight. Around her, other staff members did the same, a quiet nervousness settling over everyone. This wasn't just another event. This was Dominic Ashworth's stage. Remember. James appeared beside her as they took their positions on the gallery floor. Invisible. She nodded, taking her assigned spot near a velvet rope barrier. From here, she had a clear view of the main floor and the small stage where Ashworth would presumably make his presentation. The guests began arriving at 7:30. Iris watched them flow in like a different species. The men in suits that probably cost thousands. The women in dresses that shimmered under the lights, jewelry that caught and threw light like little fires. They moved with the easy confidence of people who'd never had to check a price tag, never had to choose between medication and groceries. Laughter filled the space, bright and brittle. Conversations about summer homes and recent trips to Europe. Everyone was performing for everyone else, a careful dance of status and connection. And then he arrived. Dominic Ashworth entered like royalty, and the energy in the room shifted immediately. He was tall, silver-haired, maybe 60 but carrying it well. His suit was impeccable, tailored to perfection. But it was his eyes that Iris noticed first. Cold. Calculating. The eyes of someone who assessed value in everything and everyone. Behind him walked a younger woman, late 20s, elegant in a navy dress that probably cost more than Iris's entire wardrobe. She had his features, softer. His daughter, Iris guessed. Dominic, darling. A woman in red swept forward, air-kissing near his cheeks. The new Monet rumors are true, then? All will be revealed. Bethany. His voice was smooth, practiced. Patience. The crowd parted for him naturally. He moved through the gallery greeting guests, his daughter trailing behind with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Iris noticed the way the young woman's shoulders tensed whenever her father spoke. He commanded the room effortlessly, and Iris realized with a sick feeling that men like this never questioned their right to command. It was as natural to them as breathing. Ladies and gentlemen. Dominic's voice cut through the conversations. If you'll gather round, I have some exceptional pieces to share with you this evening. The guests assembled, champagne in hand, expressions eager. Iris watched from her position by the barrier, trying to make herself smaller, more invisible. Dominic stood before the first covered pedestal, his hand resting on the velvet cloth. Tonight, you're among the first to witness what I consider the crown jewels of my collection. Pieces that represent not just artistic achievement, but the culmination of years of searching, authenticating, and acquiring. He pulled the cloth away with a flourish. Beneath it sat a landscape painting, medium-sized, in an ornate gold frame. The crowd leaned forward, murmuring appreciation. A previously unknown Monet. Dominic's voice carried pride and possessiveness in equal measure. From his Garden series. Authenticated just last month. The murmurs grew louder. Cameras flashed. Someone applauded. He moved to the second pedestal, pulling away another cloth. This time, a larger canvas. Figures in an architectural setting, rendered in loose, impressionistic strokes. And this. He paused for effect. A work from the Symbolist movement. Exceptionally rare. Iris's eyes locked on the second painting. Something about it called to her. The use of shadow. The architectural elements. The emotional weight of the composition. She found herself leaning forward slightly, forgetting for a moment where she was. And finally, Dominic moved to the smallest pedestal. A piece that speaks to the power of the sea. The cloth came away, revealing a small canvas, perhaps 12 by 16 inches. A seascape. Violent brushstrokes in blues and greys. Waves crashing against an unseen shore. The foam rendered with palette knife, thick and textured. Iris's breath caught. Something was wrong. She couldn't say exactly what, not from this distance. But her trained eye, dormant for so long, was whispering warnings. The craquelure pattern. The way the paint sat on the canvas. Something. The guests were applauding now, champagne flowing, conversations blooming about value and rarity. Dominic basked in the attention, answering questions with practiced ease. Iris told herself to look away. This wasn't her business. She was here to monitor barriers, not evaluate art. But she couldn't stop looking at that seascape. The evening wore on. Iris's feet ached. She'd been standing in the same spot for over an hour, watching the wealthy admire their wealth. Around her, waiters moved with trays of champagne and hors d'oeuvres. The guests grew louder, emboldened by alcohol and mutual admiration. She was clearing empty glasses from a nearby table, trying to remain unobtrusive, when it happened. A man's voice, loud with drink and confidence. Do you think the help even understands what they're looking at? I mean, to them it's all just, what, colors on canvas? Laughter followed. Iris kept her eyes down, reaching for another glass. Oh, Marcus, be kind. A woman's voice, amused rather than reproachful. They are doing their best. More laughter. Iris felt heat creep up her neck. She turned to move away, but her path was blocked. Dominic Ashworth stood directly in front of her, his cold eyes assessing. The conversations around them died down as people noticed his attention shifting. Iris froze, glasses balanced on her tray. You there. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Authority, what's your name? Her throat went dry. Company, sir. Iris Company. His eyes flickered to her name tag, then back to her face. Tell me, Miss Company, do you enjoy working here? Surrounded by such beauty. It was a trap. She could feel it. Every instinct screamed at her to give a simple answer and escape. Yes, sir. Very much, sir. But something in his tone, the slight smirk on his lips, the way the guests were already smiling in anticipation, made her pause. I do, sir. The words came out steadier than she felt. Fascinating. He turned slightly, including his audience in the moment. And have you learned anything in your time here? About art, perhaps? The question hung in the air like a noose. The guests were watching now, sensing entertainment. Bethany, the woman in red, leaned forward slightly. Marcus, who'd made the comment about the help, grinned openly. Iris felt the world narrow to this moment. This choice. A little, sir. She kept her voice neutral, hoping he'd lose interest. Instead, his smile widened. How delightful. He turned to the nearest pedestal, the one holding the small seascape. He lifted the painting carefully, turning back to face Iris and the assembled crowd. Then let's have some fun, shall we? The room went completely quiet. Even the waiters stilled. Iris felt her pulse hammering in her throat. Dominic held up the seascape, his expression one of absolute confidence. I'll make you a deal, Miss Company. A challenge, if you will. He paused, letting the tension build. The guests were rapt, already smiling. Identify the artist of this piece. Right now, in front of everyone. Tell me the period, the technique, the school. If you can do that, I'll make you head curator of my entire collection. The words landed like a bomb. For a split second, no one reacted. Then the laughter started. It rolled through the crowd in waves, sharp and cruel. Marcus doubled over. Bethany pressed a hand to her chest, shoulders shaking. The idea was so absurd, so perfectly ridiculous, that it became the joke of the evening. Iris felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Her hands, still holding the tray, began to tremble. The glasses clinked together softly. This was humiliation, pure and calculated. A game for his audience. Proof of the natural order. The billionaire and the security guard. Power and powerlessness. She could walk away. Should walk away. Every survival instinct she'd honed over 10 years of low-wage work told her to apologize, lower her eyes, retreat. But that painting was still wrong. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the uniforms and the exhaustion and the years of making herself small, someone else was waking up. The girl in the photograph. The one with paint-stained overalls and dreams. Iris set the tray down on the nearest table. Her hands were shaking, but she did it carefully, each glass settling without spilling. The laughter continued around her, a wall of sound. She looked up. Met Dominic Ashworth's eyes directly. "What if I try?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the sudden hush that followed, it carried perfectly. The laughter intensified, but there was something different in it now. An edge of disbelief. She'd actually responded. The security guard had accepted the challenge. Dominic's smile grew wider, more predatory. He was certain he'd won before it even started. "Oh, this is going to be marvelous." From across the room, Iris caught James's eye. He looked stricken, worried. He took a half step forward, ready to intervene. To pull her away from this disaster. She raised her hand slightly. The gesture was small, but he understood. "Don't. I need to do this myself." The crowd was forming a loose circle now, guests pressing closer to witness the spectacle. Some were still laughing. Others looked uncomfortable, as if they'd stumbled into something crueler than they'd bargained for. But no one left. No one intervened. Dominic placed the seascape on the pedestal directly in front of Iris. The slap of the frame against marble sounded like a challenge. A dare. "Go ahead, Miss Company. Amaze us. If you can." Iris stepped forward. Her legs felt weak, but they held. She reached toward the painting, her fingers hovering just above the frame. The canvas was small, but it suddenly felt massive. The strokes of grey and blue blurred before her eyes. Her heart hammered so hard she could feel it in her throat, her fingertips, her temples. And then, slowly, the painting came into focus. She saw the layers. The technique. The deliberate chaos of the brushwork. Her mind, so long dormant in this capacity, began to wake. To remember. To analyze. The guests' whispers faded. The gallery seemed to hold its breath. Iris's chest rose and fell as she battled her fear. She closed her eyes for a brief second, reaching for something she'd buried deep. When she opened them again, the words were there, waiting. She took a deep breath. Her throat was desert dry, but she spoke anyway. The brushwork. Her voice trembled but held. "It's aggressive. Almost violent." A few scattered laughs started, but they died quickly. Something in her tone gave them pause. She continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. "The technique is wet on wet. You can see the blending in the sky. And here." She gestured without touching. "The foam is rendered with a palette knife. Thick application. Heavy texture." The whispers stopped entirely. The gallery was now completely silent except for her voice. Bethany's champagne glass hung suspended halfway to her lips. Marcus sat up straighter, the smirk beginning to fade from his face. Iris leaned closer, her eyes scanning the canvas with an intensity that surprised even her. "The palette is limited. Prussian blue, titanium white, Payne's grey. Classical maritime colors, but the application is expressionistic." Dominic's smile remained fixed, but something flickered behind his eyes. "Uncertainty. Impossible. The composition." Iris's voice was stronger now, steadier. "The horizon line sits at the golden ratio. Classical proportion despite the chaotic execution. The artist understood structure even while depicting chaos." She straightened slightly, her hands clasped in front of her to hide their trembling. "This isn't just a seascape. The emotional register is too intense. The artist wasn't painting water. They were painting grief. Despair masked as rage." A murmur went through the crowd. Not laughter now. Something else. Confusion. Surprise. The beginnings of respect. The young woman in navy, Dominic's daughter, was staring at Iris with wide eyes. She looked between her father and Iris as if seeing something shift in the air between them. James, still across the room, had a hand pressed to his chest. His lips formed silent words. Keep going. The emotional vulnerability in the rendering. Iris continued, her confidence building with each observation. The focus on the sublime rather than the heroic. This is Northern European in influence. Late 19th century, post-romantic. But the technique is individualistic. Not part of a traditional school. An outsider. She paused, running her finger along the edge of the frame without quite touching it. And the emotional weight, the particular treatment of light and shadow in the water. This was painted by a woman. The room erupted in whispers. Several guests turned to look at Dominic, whose smile had frozen into something that no longer looked natural. A woman. That was a significant claim in maritime painting, a genre dominated historically by men. Marcus pulled out his phone, fingers moving quickly across the screen. Bethany set down her glass, no longer even pretending to find this amusing. The daughter, whose name Iris still didn't know, spoke for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. How can you tell? Iris looked at her, grateful for the question that felt like genuine curiosity rather than mockery. The vulnerability. Male maritime painters of this period typically focused on man's dominance over nature. Ships battling waves. Heroic struggle. This piece has no human element at all. It's about surrendering to the sublime. Being overwhelmed by forces beyond control. That perspective is more common in women artists of the period who were working outside academic constraints. The young woman nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Dominic cleared his throat, the sound sharp and deliberate. That's all very poetic, Miss Company. But I asked you to identify the artist. You've given me speculation and, quite frankly, guesswork. He turned to his audience, seeking their support. Anyone with a basic art history course could make such observations. But his voice lacked its earlier confidence. And the guests weren't laughing anymore. Iris met his gaze. You're right. I haven't identified the artist yet. Because I can't. Triumph flashed across Dominic's face. He opened his mouth to deliver what was surely meant to be a devastating final word. But Iris wasn't finished. I can't identify the artist. Her voice rang out clear and steady. Because this painting is a forgery. The gallery exploded. If you've ever felt invisible, overlooked, or underestimated, you know exactly what Iris is feeling right now. You know the weight of carrying knowledge no one believes you possess. If this moment is hitting you somewhere deep, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Let me know you're here. That you understand. And stay close, because what happens next will show you why speaking your truth, even when your voice shakes, is the most powerful thing you can do. The chaos that erupted was immediate and total. Guests spoke over each other, voices rising in pitch and volume. Champagne sloshed in glasses. Someone dropped a plate. The sharp crack of porcelain hitting marble cut through the noise. Dominic's face transformed. The polished mask of superiority cracked, revealing something ugly beneath. His voice, when it came, was low and dangerous. What did you just say? But Iris had already crossed a line. There was no going back now, and she felt a strange kind of freedom in that. The freedom of having nothing left to lose. This painting is a forgery. She spoke louder this time, her voice carrying across the gallery. The craquelure pattern is wrong. It's been artificially aged. Probably using chemical accelerants. You have no idea what you're talking about. Dominic stepped closer, his face reddening. How dare you make such an accusation? Do you have any idea who authenticated this piece? Iris held her ground. I can't speak to the authentication. But I can see what's in front of me. The craquelure, the fine cracks in aged paint, should follow the underlying brushstrokes. These cracks are too uniform. Too evenly distributed. They were created artificially, not through natural aging. Marcus had his phone out, speaking rapidly to someone. Bethany had gone pale. The journalist who'd been hovering at the edges of the party was suddenly writing furiously in a small notebook. "This is absurd." Dominic turned to address the crowd. "This woman is a security guard. She has no credentials, no expertise. She's trying to sabotage this evening out of, I don't know, jealousy? Resentment?" But his words sounded defensive now, not authoritative. The guests were looking at the painting with new eyes, some leaning closer, trying to see what Iris had seen. The daughter stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Father, if there's even a possibility she's right, we should have it tested." "Simone, don't be ridiculous." Dominic's voice was sharp. So her name was Simone. "I'm not being ridiculous." Simone's voice grew stronger. "If the painting is genuine, testing will confirm that. But if she's right and we've been displaying a forgery, claiming it as part of your collection." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The implications hung heavy in the air. Fraud. Damaged reputation. The erosion of trust that could collapse an entire empire built on perceived expertise. Dominic rounded on Iris again. "Fine. Let's say, hypothetically, that you're correct. Which you're not. But hypothetically. How would you know? What makes you qualified to make such a judgment?" Iris felt the weight of the question. This was the moment. The revelation that would change everything. She took a breath and let the words come. "I studied at Blackwell Academy of Fine Arts." The whispers started immediately, but she pushed through them. "Full scholarship. I was in my final year, specializing in art authentication and conservation. My thesis was on technical analysis of paintings, specifically identifying forgeries through microscopic examination of materials and aging patterns." The gallery had gone quiet again. Every eye was on her. Dominic's expression shifted rapidly. Confusion, then calculation, then something that might have been fear. A Blackwell graduate. The academy was prestigious, its art history and conservation programs legendary. Then why are you working as a security guard? His question was meant to undermine, but it came out sounding uncertain. Iris felt her throat tighten. This was the part that hurt. The part she'd spent 10 years trying not to think about. "I became pregnant at 19. Her voice was quiet, but in the silence, everyone heard. "I had a son. He was born with severe health complications. Muscular dystrophy. He needed round-the-clock care. Equipment. Medications that insurance wouldn't cover." Simone's hand flew to her mouth. Bethany looked away, suddenly unable to meet Iris's eyes. "I was 1 semester away from graduating when I had to make a choice." She felt tears threatening but forced them back. "Finish my degree and watch my brother suffer, or leave school and work whatever jobs would pay enough to keep him alive." Brother, not son. The words had slipped out wrong in her nervousness, but she didn't correct them. The truth was the same either way. Someone she loved more than her own dreams. "So I left." She looked directly at Dominic. "I took this job, and others like it, because they paid enough to cover his care. And every single day, I walk through galleries like this one, surrounded by art, and I remember everything I learned. Everything I lost." The silence that followed was profound. James, across the room, was openly crying now. He'd worked beside Iris for 3 years and never known. Marcus set his phone down slowly. The smugness had completely left his face. Bethany was staring at the floor. Simone approached Iris slowly, as if afraid sudden movement might break something fragile. Her voice, when she spoke, was thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry. What you sacrificed. I can't even imagine." Iris nodded, not trusting herself to speak. But Dominic wasn't finished. His world was crumbling, and cornered men were dangerous. "That's a very touching story." His voice dripped with venom. "But a sob story doesn't make you right. It doesn't give you the expertise to challenge a piece that's been authenticated by professionals. Then test it." The voice came from the back of the crowd. An older man stepped forward, someone Iris didn't recognize. "If she's wrong, testing will prove it. But if she's right." He looked at Dominic meaningfully. "Well, then we all deserve to know the truth, don't we?" Murmurs of agreement rippled through the guests. Dominic's jaw clenched. Fine. We'll have it tested. And when it comes back authentic, I expect a public apology. But there was sweat beading on his forehead now. His hands, Iris noticed, were shaking slightly. The journalist spoke up, her voice professional and pointed. Mr. Ashworth, for the record, when did you acquire this piece? Dominic's eyes narrowed. Why does that matter? Just curious about the provenance. The journalist's pen hovered over her notebook. 3 years ago. His answer was clipped. From a private collection. Fully authenticated at the time of purchase. Iris's mind raced. 3 years ago. Something about that timeline nagged at her. And then, like a dam breaking, the memory flooded back. 3 years ago, she'd been working a night cleaning shift at a small consulting firm. Art acquisition specialists. She'd been emptying trash cans, invisible as always, when she'd heard a phone conversation. A man's voice, stressed and urgent. The memory crystallized with perfect clarity. I know it's a risk, Mr. Ashworth, but the price is incredibly favorable. The provenance is shaky, yes, but no one will question it once it's in your collection. Your reputation will validate it. Iris had frozen outside the office door, not meaning to eavesdrop but unable to move. The voice had continued. I understand your concerns about the aging. But honestly, sir, who's going to look that closely? You're Dominic Ashworth. When you say something is genuine, people believe you. She'd never connected that phone call to this moment until now. She'd just been a cleaner, overhearing rich people's problems. But now, standing in this gallery, the pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. You knew. The words left Iris's mouth before she could stop them. You knew it was questionable when you bought it. The entire room seemed to inhale sharply. Dominic's face went from red to white. That's a serious accusation. I was working as a night cleaner at Hoffman Art Consultants 3 years ago. Iris's voice was steady now, powered by certainty. I heard your acquisition consultant warn you about the provenance. About the questionable aging. He told you it was a risk, but that your reputation would legitimize it. This is preposterous. Dominic looked around wildly, seeking support from his guests. She's lying. Making things up to cover her embarrassment. But the guests weren't looking at him with sympathy anymore. They were looking at him with suspicion. And in the social circles of the ultra-wealthy, suspicion was as damaging as proof. Simone's voice cut through the noise, quiet but devastating. Dad. Tell me she's wrong. Dominic turned to his daughter, his expression a mixture of anger and something that might have been desperation. Simone, you don't understand how this world works. Sometimes you have to take calculated risks to build a collection of this caliber. So it's true. Simone took a step back from her father. You bought a painting you suspected was fake because you thought no one would dare question you. The words hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Bethany was already gathering her things, her face carefully neutral. Marcus had his phone out again, probably texting contacts, distancing himself from the unfolding disaster. The journalist was writing so fast her hand was a blur. This is a witch hunt. Dominic's voice had risen to near shouting. I have built my reputation over decades. I have one of the most respected collections in the country. And you're all going to take the word of a cleaning woman over mine? Security guard, actually. James had appeared beside Iris, his presence solid and supportive. And I'd trust her word over yours any day. Dominic looked around the room, seeing his empire crumbling in real time. Guests were leaving, making polite excuses, their faces carefully blank. The evening that was supposed to cement his legacy was instead destroying it. Get out. He pointed at Iris, his hand shaking. You're fired. Get out of my gallery. It's not your gallery. Iris's voice was calm. I work for the Pembroke. You're just a guest here. Same as me. The simple truth of it seemed to break something in him. He stood there, surrounded by his art, his carefully curated image in pieces around his feet. Simone approached her father one last time. You taught me that integrity was everything. That our name meant something because we valued truth above all else. She looked at the seascape, then back at him. How could you? She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked away, heels clicking on marble, and didn't look back. The gallery was emptying rapidly now. Staff members were frozen, unsure whether to stay or go. Patricia, the events manager, was on her phone, probably calling the gallery director. Iris stood in the center of the chaos she'd created, feeling strangely calm. Her hands had stopped shaking. Her heart rate had slowed. She'd done what she came here to do, though she hadn't known she'd come here to do it. She'd told the truth. Whatever happened next, she'd told the truth. James touched her elbow gently. "We should probably go." She nodded. But before she could move, a hand grabbed her arm. She turned to find Simone Ashworth, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "Wait. Please." Simone's voice broke. I need to apologize. For him. For myself. For not speaking up sooner when I saw how he treated people like you." Iris looked at this young woman, born into wealth and privilege, genuinely broken by what she'd learned tonight. "You can make it right." Iris's voice was gentle. "Not with an apology to me, but with how you use your position going forward." Simone nodded, wiping at her eyes. "The Ashworth Foundation. We have scholarship funds. What if I made sure students like you, people who had to leave school for family emergencies, what if I made sure they could go back?" Iris felt something crack open in her chest. A door she'd thought was sealed forever suddenly showing light around its edges. "That would be good." Her voice was barely a whisper. "That would help a lot of people. Starting with you." Simone gripped her hand. "Please. Let me help you finish your degree. Let me help you get back what my father and people like him tried to take from you." Iris wanted to say no. Pride demanded she say no. But she thought of Eli at home, of the years of sacrifice, of the girl in the photograph with paint-stained overalls. Maybe. The word felt like stepping off a cliff. Maybe I could. Across the gallery, Dominic Ashworth sat alone at a table, staring at his half-empty champagne glass. The man who'd commanded the room an hour ago now looked small. Defeated. And for the first time since this evening began, Iris felt something other than fear or anger toward him. She felt pity. Because he'd built his entire identity on being better than others. On being above question. And when that illusion shattered, there was nothing underneath to hold him up. Iris reached up and unpinned her security badge. The metal felt light in her palm. She'd worn it for 3 years. Worn it like armor, like invisibility, like protection from a world that had crushed her once before. She set it down on the nearest table with a soft click. "I quit." James's eyes widened. "Iris, you don't have to." "I know." She smiled at him, and it felt real. Genuine. For the first time in longer than she could remember. "But I think I need to." She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the half-empty gallery. Behind her, the art remained on the walls. The Rothko that made her chest ache. The Degas that reminded her of her mother. The contemporary pieces that challenged and confused and delighted her. But she was no longer just looking at them as a guard. She was looking at them as someone who understood. Who belonged in this world, uniform or not. The night air outside was cool and fresh. The city stretched before her, full of lights and noise and possibility. James caught up with her on the sidewalk, slightly out of breath. "What are you going to do now?" Iris looked up at the sky, at the stars barely visible through the city's glow. "I think." She paused, letting herself really feel the answer. "I think I'm going to go home and tell my brother about tonight. About what happened. About how sometimes the most terrifying thing you can do is remember who you really are." James nodded. And then. She smiled. "And then maybe I'm going to dig out my old textbooks. Start remembering what I used to know. What I still know." They stood together in comfortable silence for a moment. "You were magnificent in there." James's voice was soft. "I've never seen anything like it. I was terrified." "I know. That's what made it magnificent." They walked to the bus stop together, two people in security uniforms who just witnessed and participated in something that would ripple far beyond this single night. Iris's phone buzzed. A text from Maria, the daytime caregiver. "Eli's asking when you'll be home." He saw something on social media about an incident at the gallery. "Are you okay?" Iris smiled and typed back. "I'm more than okay. I'm on my way home. Tell him I have a story for him." She pocketed her phone and looked at James. "You know this is going to be everywhere by morning. The story, the scandal, all of it." "Probably." He shrugged. "You going to be ready for that?" Iris thought about the question. 24 hours ago, the answer would have been a definite no. The idea of being visible, of being known, would have terrified her. But tonight, she'd stood in front of power and wealth and cruelty, and she'd spoken truth. She'd remembered who she was beneath the uniform. Beneath the years of survival mode. Beneath the fear. "I think so." She nodded slowly. "Yeah. I think I'm ready." The bus pulled up, brakes hissing. They climbed aboard, finding seats near the back. Through the window, Iris watched the gallery recede into the distance. The glass and white stone. The temple of art where she'd been invisible for so long. But she wasn't invisible anymore. And as the bus carried her home through the city streets, Iris felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years. Hope. Not the desperate, fragile hope of survival, but the solid, grounded hope of someone who'd fought and won. Who'd faced the thing that terrified them most and come out the other side transformed. The girl in the photograph with paint-stained overalls and dreams wasn't gone. She'd just been waiting. Waiting for the moment when Iris would remember her. Reclaim her. Become her again. That moment was now. The bus turned a corner, and through the window, Iris could see the first hints of dawn beginning to lighten the eastern sky. A new day was coming. And for the first time in a very long time, she couldn't wait to see what it would bring. The apartment was dark when Iris turned her key in the lock. 4:30 in the morning. The sky outside was caught in that strange liminal space between night and dawn, everything painted in shades of blue and grey. She stepped inside quietly, expecting silence. Instead, she found light spilling from under Eli's door. Her heart jumped. She dropped her bag and crossed the small living room in 3 strides, pushing open his door. Eli was awake, propped up in bed, his laptop balanced on a pillow across his lap. The oxygen machine hummed its steady rhythm beside him. He looked up as she entered, and his face split into a grin she hadn't seen in years. "You're trending." His voice was hoarse but excited. "What?" He turned the laptop toward her. The screen showed Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all open in different tabs. And there, across every single one, was the same story. Security guard exposes billionaire art fraud. Woman with unfinished degree humiliates collector who mocked her. She cleans galleries by night, but tonight she cleaned up the art world. Iris sank onto the edge of his bed, staring at the screen. There were photos. Video clips. Someone had recorded the confrontation on their phone. She watched herself, small on the screen, standing before that seascape painting, her voice steady as she explained crackle patterns and artificial aging. The video had been viewed 4 million times. In 6 hours. How did you? She couldn't finish the question. Eli gestured to his phone. Maria saw it first. Someone tagged the gallery. Then it just exploded. "Iris, everyone is talking about you." He scrolled through the comments. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. "This woman is a hero. I'm crying. She sacrificed everything for her family and still stood up for what was right. Dominic Ashworth is finished. His entire collection is being questioned now. Someone find out how we can help her go back to school." Iris felt her hands start to shake. Not from fear this time. From something bigger. Something she couldn't quite name. "Are you okay?" Eli's voice was soft, concerned. She looked at her brother. 24 years old, his body failing him a little more each year, but his eyes still bright with the same fierce intelligence he'd had as a child. The brother she'd given up everything for. The brother who'd never asked her to, but who she'd choose again and again if given the chance. "I'm terrified." She admitted it quietly. "I just blew up my entire life on camera." "Good." He reached for her hand, his grip weak but steady. "Maybe your old life needed to blow up." The words settled over her like a blanket. Maybe he was right. Her phone, which had been buzzing intermittently during the bus ride home, suddenly erupted with notifications. Calls, texts, emails, all flooding in at once. You should probably look at those. Eli nodded toward the phone. Iris picked it up with trembling fingers. The first email was from an address she recognized. Blackwell Academy. Her breath caught. Dear Miss Company. The email began. We have been made aware of the events at the Pembroke Gallery this evening. Several members of our faculty remember you from your time as a student and have reached out to express their support and admiration. We would like to invite you to meet with Dean Patricia Morris at your earliest convenience to discuss the possibility of your return to complete your degree. Given the extraordinary circumstances of your departure and your demonstrated expertise and integrity, we believe Blackwell would be honored to welcome you back. Iris read the email 3 times, certain she was misunderstanding. But the words didn't change. What is it? Eli was watching her face. Blackwell wants me back. The words felt surreal in her mouth, like speaking a language she'd forgotten. Eli's grin widened. Of course they do. Did you see yourself tonight? Iris, you were brilliant. I was a security guard accusing a billionaire of fraud. No. Eli shook his head firmly. You were an expert speaking truth. There's a difference. More emails poured in. News outlets requesting interviews. Art publications asking for her perspective on authentication fraud in private collections. And then, one that made her heart stop. From Simone Ashworth. Iris. The email was brief, written in haste. I meant what I said tonight. The Ashworth Foundation Scholarship Fund is yours if you want it. Full tuition, living expenses, and a stipend for Eli's care. No strings. Just please, let me help fix what my family broke. Below the message was a phone number. She's serious. Iris whispered. Eli leaned over to read the screen. So what are you going to do? Iris set the phone down carefully. Dawn was breaking outside the window now, real light beginning to touch the sky. She thought about the girl in the photograph. About 10 years of survival mode. About art that made her chest ache and dreams she'd buried so deep she'd almost forgotten they existed. I think. She took a slow breath. I think I'm going to say yes. 3 days later, Iris sat in Dean Patricia Morris's office at Blackwell Academy. The campus looked exactly as she remembered. Old brick buildings with ivy climbing their walls. Students walking between classes with portfolios under their arms. The smell of paint and creativity and possibility. The dean was a woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, reading glasses perched on her nose. She looked up as Iris entered, and her face broke into a warm smile. Iris Company. She stood, extending her hand. Or should I say, the woman who single-handedly restored integrity to art authentication. Iris shook her hand, still feeling surreal. I just told the truth. Exactly. Dean Morris gestured for Iris to sit. That's precisely why we want you back. Sit, please. Iris lowered herself into the chair across from the dean's desk. Through the window behind Morris, she could see the studio building where she'd spent countless hours a decade ago. I've reviewed your academic record. The dean opened a folder on her desk. You were exceptional, Iris. Your thesis work on technical analysis and forgery detection was some of the best we've seen. Your professors were devastated when you had to leave. I didn't have a choice. I know. The dean's voice softened. And that's what makes your sacrifice even more profound. You walked away from your passion to care for family. That takes a kind of strength we don't teach in classrooms. Iris felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Here's what I'm proposing. Dean Morris leaned forward. You were 1 semester away from completing your degree. Those credits still stand. We'd like you to return in the fall semester. Complete your thesis, which I understand focused on Margaret Kessler and other forgotten women symbolists. Iris nodded, not trusting her voice. Perfect. The dean smiled. Your recent, shall we say, viral expertise makes you uniquely qualified to expand that work. We'd also like you to guest lecture in our authentication course. Share your experience with current students. Guest lecture. Iris's voice came out as barely a whisper. I'm not qualified to teach. You exposed a forgery in a Billionaire's collection while working as a security guard. Dean Morris raised an eyebrow. I'd say you're more qualified than most. Lived experience matters, Iris. Theory is important, but you've applied this knowledge in the real world, under pressure, with real consequences. That's invaluable. Iris tried to process this. A week ago, she'd been invisible. Now she was being offered not just her education back, but a voice. A platform. The Ashworth Foundation has already transferred the scholarship funds. The dean consulted her papers. Full tuition, living expenses, and a medical care stipend for your brother. That gives you the freedom to focus entirely on your studies. I don't know what to say. Say yes. The dean's smile was kind. Say yes to yourself, Iris. To the future you deserved 10 years ago. Better late than never. Iris thought of Eli at home, thought of the girl in the photograph, thought of standing in that gallery speaking truth despite her terror. Yes. The word came out stronger than she expected. Yes, I'll come back. The news coverage didn't die down the way Iris hoped it would. If anything, it intensified. The journalist who'd been at the gallery that night published a long-form piece in a major art publication. The security guard who saw what experts missed. It detailed not just the confrontation, but Iris's background. Her scholarship to Blackwell. Her sacrifice. The years of invisible labor while carrying expertise no one acknowledged. The piece went viral beyond the art world. Mainstream media picked it up. Morning shows called. Podcasts reached out. Iris turned down most of them. She wasn't interested in fame. But she accepted one interview, with a small podcast that focused on women in arts and education. The host was a woman named Rachel, her voice warm and genuinely curious. What made you speak up that night? Rachel asked. You could have stayed silent. Kept your job. Stayed invisible. Iris considered the question carefully. They were recording in a small studio, just her and Rachel and a microphone. I think. Iris paused, reaching for the truth. I think I'd been silent for so long that I'd forgotten I had a voice. And when Dominic Ashworth held up that painting, something in me just snapped. Not in an angry way, but in a, I can't keep pretending to be less than I am way. That resonates with so many people. Rachel's voice was gentle. The emails we've gotten since announcing this interview, Iris. Hundreds of them. People who've hidden their knowledge, their expertise, their worth because they were in jobs society deems less than. Iris felt her throat tighten. I was one of those people. And honestly, I don't think there's anything wrong with any job. Cleaning, security, service work, it's all valuable. But when people assume that's all you're capable of, when they mock you for it, when they use it as proof you're less than human, that's when it becomes something else. What would you say to those people? The ones hiding their light? Iris thought of James, still working security at the Pembroke. Thought of Maria, the caregiver who worked 3 jobs to support her own family. Thought of everyone who'd ever been made to feel invisible. I'd say you're not less than anyone. Your circumstances don't define your worth. And if you get the chance to speak your truth, even if your voice shakes, even if you're terrified, do it anyway. Because the world needs to hear from people who've lived real lives, not just people who've had easy ones. The podcast episode dropped on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, it had been downloaded 500,000 times. If this story is reminding you of your own worth, of talents you've buried or dreams you've deferred, I want you to do something for me. Leave a comment. Tell me one thing you're good at that the world doesn't see. One dream you've set aside. Share it with this community. Because when we speak these things out loud, when we acknowledge them, we start the process of reclaiming them. And subscribe if you haven't already. These stories matter. Your story matters. The hardest conversation Iris had was with James. They met at a coffee shop near the gallery, a week after that night. James looked tired but smiled when he saw her. The famous Iris Company. He stood to hug her. How does it feel to be a household name? Exhausting. She sank into the chair across from him. How's work? His expression shifted. Weird. Everyone's treating me different now. Like I'm suddenly more competent because I was your friend. You are competent. You always were. I know that. James stirred his coffee absently. But they're only seeing it now because you made them question their assumptions. Makes you wonder what else they're not seeing. Iris nodded. She'd been wondering the same thing. Dominic hasn't been back, James said quietly. The gallery's distancing themselves from him. His entire collection is under review. 3 more pieces have been flagged as potentially fraudulent. Iris felt a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. And Simone. She came by yesterday. James's expression softened. Donated a significant amount to the gallery's staff education fund. Said she wants to make sure people like us have access to the same opportunities as people born into wealth. That's good. It is. James looked at her carefully. I hear you're going back to school. If I can figure out how to be a student again after 10 years. You'll figure it out. His confidence in her was absolute. You always were smarter than the rest of us. That's not true. Iris. He reached across the table, taking her hand. You memorized entire art history textbooks while working full-time and caring for Eli. You never forgot any of it. That's not just smart. That's extraordinary. She squeezed his hand, grateful beyond words. What happens to us now? James asked. You're going back to your real life. I'm still here. Your life is real too, Iris said firmly. And this isn't goodbye. I'm only going to be across town. We'll still see each other. Promise? Promise. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city move past the window. You inspired something, you know, James said eventually. The other security guards. The custodial staff. People are starting to talk about forming a union. Pushing for better pay, better treatment. Your story made them realize they don't have to accept being invisible. Iris felt something warm bloom in her chest. Good. That's really good. Because of you. Because someone had to go first. She met his eyes. But others were ready to follow. They just needed to see it was possible. The fall semester started on a crisp September morning. Iris stood outside the studio building at Blackwell Academy, a new backpack over her shoulder, feeling like she'd stepped into a time machine. Students flowed around her, most of them a decade younger. They moved with the easy confidence of people whose education was a given, not a miracle. Iris took a deep breath and walked inside. The studio spaces were exactly as she remembered. High ceilings with massive windows for natural light. The smell of oil paint and turpentine. Easels arranged in rows. Classical music playing softly from someone's speaker. She found her assigned space, setting her bag down carefully. The easel felt familiar under her hands. Like greeting an old friend. Is this your first semester? Iris turned to find a young woman, maybe 20, with purple streaks in her hair and paint already somehow on her shirt despite class not having started. No, actually. Iris smiled. I was here 10 years ago. I'm finishing what I started. The young woman's eyes widened. Wait. Are you Iris Company? The Iris Company. Iris felt heat creep up her neck. I guess that's me now. Oh my God. The woman extended her hand, excited. I'm Casey. I saw your video. You're like, legendary. Half the people in our authentication course are only here because of you. That can't be true. It totally is. Professor Chen starts every class talking about how real-world application matters more than theory. You're literally the example she uses. Iris didn't know what to say to that. Other students were filtering in now, and she noticed several of them glancing her way, whispering. Great. So much for blending in. But then Professor Whitmore entered, and everything else fell away. The professor was older now, her hair more grey than brown, but her eyes were still sharp and kind. She scanned the room, her gaze landing on Iris. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Then Whitmore smiled, warm and genuine. Welcome back. She said it quietly, just for Iris, but the words felt like an embrace. Class began, and Iris felt herself sinking into the familiar rhythm. Discussion of technique. Analysis of historical works. The language of art that she'd spoken fluently once and had never truly forgotten. When Whitmore asked the class to analyze a projection of a Renaissance painting, Iris's hand went up before she could second-guess herself. The composition uses sfumato technique. She heard her own voice, steady and knowledgeable. Leonardo's influence is clear in the soft transitions between colors. But the treatment of fabric suggests Venetian school training. The artist studied both traditions. Whitmore nodded, pleased. Exactly. Can you identify the specific ways the Venetian influence appears? Iris could. She talked about color saturation, about the weight of drapery, about tiny technical choices that revealed training and influence. The words flowed like water, like they'd been dammed up for years and were finally free. When class ended, several students approached her with questions. Casey invited her to a study group. A young man asked if she'd look at his authentication project. Iris walked out of that building 2 hours later feeling like she'd been asleep for a decade and had finally woken up. Her phone buzzed. A text from Eli. How was day 1, college girl? She smiled and typed back. Like coming home. The weeks folded into months. Iris fell into a rhythm she hadn't known since her first time at Blackwell. Classes in the morning. Library research in the afternoon. Studio time in the evening. Her thesis on Margaret Kessler and forgotten women symbolists expanded, deepened, became something she was genuinely proud of. Dean Morris asked her to give that guest lecture in the authentication course. Iris spent a week preparing, terrified. When the day came, she stood before 40 students and told her story. Not the viral video version. The real one. She talked about recognizing crackle or patterns while emptying trash cans in galleries after hours. About studying authentication techniques during lunch breaks. About the way invisible labor gave her access to spaces and conversations that revealed truth. The students listened, rapt. Several cried. One raised her hand at the end. How did you keep learning when you had no time, no resources, nothing supporting you? Iris considered the question. Because I loved it. Even when it hurt to love it. Even when it felt pointless. I couldn't stop seeing the art, analyzing it, remembering what I'd learned. It wasn't discipline. It was just who I was. The student nodded, understanding in her eyes. After class, a young man approached. His name was David, and he looked nervous. I'm here on scholarship, he said quietly. First in my family to go to college. Working 3 jobs to cover what the scholarship doesn't. Sometimes I feel like I don't belong here. Like everyone else has something I'm missing. Iris looked at him, seeing herself at that age. You belong here exactly as much as anyone. More, maybe. Because you know what it costs. That knowledge will make you better at this work, not worse. Don't let anyone make you feel less than. His eyes were bright with unshed tears. Thank you. As he walked away, Iris realized something. This was why she'd come back. Not just for herself, but to be visible proof that people like them belonged in these spaces. That expertise didn't only come wrapped in privilege. That winter, a major art publication asked Iris to write an article. Not about the Ashworth scandal. About Margaret Kessler. She spent weeks on it, pouring everything she'd learned back at the academy and everything she'd discovered in the years since into the piece. She wrote about how women artists were erased from history. How their work was attributed to male contemporaries or simply lost. How recognizing their contributions wasn't just historical accuracy but justice. The article published in February. Within days, it sparked conversations across the art world. Galleries began reviewing their collections, looking for misattributed works. Auction houses started researching women artists more thoroughly. A museum in Vienna reached out. They had a painting they believed might be Kessler's work. Would Iris consult on the authentication? She stared at the email for a full minute, certain she was hallucinating. Eli, reading over her shoulder, laughed. They want to pay you to do this. Like, as a job. I'm not even graduated yet. So? You're already more qualified than half the people doing this work. Iris accepted. She spent hours on video calls with the museum's conservation team, examining high-resolution images, discussing aging patterns and stylistic markers. In the end, she confirmed it was indeed Kessler's work. A piece that had been languishing in storage, attributed to unknown artist, was now properly recognized. The museum credit read, "Authentication consultation by Iris Company, Blackwell Academy." She framed the email. Spring semester brought her thesis defense. Iris stood before a panel of professors, her research displayed on screens behind her, and presented her work. Margaret Kessler and artists like her weren't forgotten by accident. She spoke with quiet passion. They were erased systematically, by critics who dismissed women's perspectives, by historians who didn't think their stories mattered, by a market that valued male genius over female talent. She clicked to the next slide, showing the Vienna painting. But their work survives. And when we find it, when we authenticate it, when we restore their names to their creations, we're not just correcting history. We're changing the future. We're telling young artists, especially young women, that their work matters. That they matter. That they'll be remembered. The panel asked questions. Iris answered them all, her voice steady, her knowledge deep and hard-won. When they asked her to step out while they deliberated, she walked into the hallway on shaking legs. 10 minutes later, Professor Whitmore emerged, smiling. "Congratulations, Iris. You passed with distinction." Iris felt her knees go weak. Whitmore caught her elbow, steadying her. "I'm so proud of you." The professor's voice was thick with emotion. "When you left 10 years ago, I was heartbroken. I knew what the world was losing. But watching you come back, watching you reclaim this, it's been one of the great privileges of my career." Iris hugged her, not caring about professional boundaries. "Thank you for remembering me. For believing I could come back. You never left, really." Whitmore pulled back, smiling through tears. "You just took a different route. And I think that route made you better at this work, not worse." Graduation was in May. Iris wore the cap and gown she'd thought she'd never wear. Eli sat in the audience in his wheelchair, Maria beside him. James had taken the day off work. Simone Ashworth was there too, having quietly become a friend over the months. When Iris's name was called, when she walked across that stage and took her diploma, the applause was thunderous. People stood. Not just her section, but huge portions of the audience. Students who'd been in her classes. Faculty who knew her story. Strangers who'd followed her journey. She looked out at them, this community that had welcomed her back, and felt something she'd never quite felt before. She felt like she belonged. After the ceremony, her small group gathered for dinner at a modest restaurant. Nothing fancy. Just people she loved, celebrating something that had seemed impossible a year ago. Eli raised his glass of water, his hand trembling slightly but his smile enormous. "To my sister, who taught me that giving up on your dreams is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. But coming back to them is even braver." They clinked glasses, and Iris blinked back tears. "What's next?" James asked. "You've got job offers, right?" 3. Iris still couldn't quite believe it. "A museum in Boston wants me for their authentication department. There's a gallery in New York looking for a curator. And Blackwell offered me an assistant professor position. Which one are you going to take?" Casey, who'd become a close friend despite the age gap, leaned forward eagerly. Iris looked around the table. At Eli, who needed her close. At James and the city she'd called home for so long. At the life she'd rebuilt here. "Blackwell." She said it with certainty. "I want to teach. I want to be for other students what my professors were for me. Proof that you can come back. That it's never too late." Simone smiled. "The foundation would love to partner with you on that. Maybe create a specific scholarship for students who've had to leave school for family emergencies. Like a second chance fund." Maria's eyes lit up. "I love that." They spent the rest of the evening planning, dreaming, imagining futures they were actually going to build. Not someday. Now. That night, back in the apartment, Iris stood in front of her bedroom mirror. She'd taken down the photograph of her younger self months ago. Not to hide it, but because she didn't need it anymore. She wasn't trying to get back to that girl. She was becoming someone new. Someone who carried both versions of herself. The dreamer and the survivor. The scholar and the security guard. All of it was her. All of it mattered. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Iris Company. The voice was male, older, unfamiliar. Speaking. My name is Richard Torres. I'm the director of the National Gallery. I've been following your work since the Ashworth incident. Iris's heart began to race. We're mounting an exhibition next year. Women symbolists, recovered and restored. We'd like you to be the lead curator. The words didn't seem real. The National Gallery. Lead curator. Mr. Torres, I just graduated. I don't have the experience. You exposed a forgery that had fooled established experts. You've authenticated a Kessler piece. Your thesis is being published in the Journal of Art Historical Research. His voice was warm. Miss Company, you have exactly the experience we need. Will you at least consider it? Iris looked around her small apartment. At Eli's door, slightly ajar so she could hear if he needed her. At the easel she'd set up in the corner, her own paintings in progress. At the life she'd built from ruins. Yes. The word felt like stepping off another cliff. Like free fall and flight all at once. I'll consider it. After they hung up, she sat in silence for a long moment. Then she walked to Eli's room and knocked softly. Come in. He was awake, as usual, laptop glowing in the dark. I just got offered lead curator at the National Gallery. Eli's face split into that enormous grin. And I think I might say yes. He closed his laptop, giving her his full attention. That would mean moving to DC. I know. What about me? Iris sat on the edge of his bed. What about you? You think I'd go anywhere without you? We're a package deal. Always have been. His eyes got bright. You've already given up so much for me. And I'd do it again. But Eli, this isn't giving something up. This is finally stepping into what I'm meant to do. And I want you there with me. He wiped at his eyes. Okay then. Let's go to DC. They sat together in comfortable silence, the oxygen machine humming, the city quiet outside. Brother and sister. Survivors. Dreamers who deferred their dreams and then, against all odds, found them again. 1 year later, Iris stood in the National Gallery, surrounded by paintings that had been lost to history. Margaret Kessler's work hung alongside pieces by Marie Spartley Stillman, Marianne Stokes, and a dozen other women whose names had been erased. The exhibition had been 2 years in the making. Authentication. Research. Delicate negotiations with museums and private collectors. Iris had overseen all of it, her expertise and passion driving every decision. The opening night was invitation only, but nothing like that night at the Pembroke. The people filling these galleries came in reverence, not performance. They came to witness resurrection, the reclaiming of voices that had been silenced. Iris wore a simple black dress, her hair pulled back, comfortable in her own skin in a way she'd never been before. She moved through the crowd, answering questions, sharing stories about the artists and their work. A journalist approached, recorder in hand. Iris Company, this exhibition is being called groundbreaking. How does it feel? Iris considered the question. It feels like justice. These women created incredible art, and then history forgot them. We're just setting the record straight. Your own story has become part of the narrative here. The woman who went from security guard to lead curator. Do you think that takes away from the art? No. Iris shook her head. I think it proves the point. That talent and expertise exist everywhere, in people society overlooks. My story isn't special. What's special is that I got a second chance. Imagine how many people never do. The journalist nodded, scribbling notes. Across the room, Iris spotted familiar faces. Eli in his wheelchair, looking proud enough to burst. James, who'd made the trip down from their city. Casey and other former classmates. Dean Morris. Professor Whitmore. Simone Ashworth, who'd quietly funded several of the authentication processes. And in the corner, trying to be inconspicuous, someone Iris hadn't expected to see. Dominic Ashworth. He looked smaller than she remembered. Older. He stood before one of the Kessler paintings, staring at it with an expression she couldn't quite read. Iris hesitated, then walked over. She stood beside him, both of them looking at the painting in silence. "It's beautiful." His voice was rough, quiet. "I was wrong. About the seascape. About you. About a lot of things." Iris didn't respond immediately. She just looked at the painting. Storm clouds over Vienna. The weight of history and loss rendered in greys and blues. "Why did you come?" she asked finally. "Because I owe you an apology." He still didn't look at her. "What I did that night. The humiliation, the cruelty. There's no excuse for it." "No. There isn't." He flinched but nodded. "I built my entire identity on being better than other people. On being the expert. The authority. And when you challenged that, when you were right and I was wrong, it broke something. I'm not looking for your redemption story." Iris's voice was gentle but firm. "I know." He finally met her eyes. "I just wanted you to know that what you did, it didn't just expose my fraud. It exposed my character. And that needed exposing." "What are you doing now?" "Consulting. Small projects. Staying out of the spotlight." He looked back at the painting. "I'm trying to learn humility. It doesn't come naturally." Iris almost smiled. "At least you're honest about it." They stood in silence for another moment. "For what it's worth." Dominic's voice was barely above a whisper. "This exhibition is extraordinary. You were meant for this work. I'm sorry I ever made you doubt that." He walked away before she could respond, disappearing into the crowd. Iris let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. That looked intense. Simone appeared at her elbow, concerned. "It was necessary." Iris turned to her friend. "How are you doing with all this?" "Proud." Simone looked around the gallery. "Of you. Of this. Of using our family's resources for something that actually matters." The Ashworth Foundation had indeed transformed. Under Simone's leadership, it now focused on supporting overlooked artists, funding scholarships for non-traditional students, and promoting equity in the art world. "Sometimes I think about that night at the Pembroke," Simone said softly. "How close I came to staying silent. To protecting him because he was my father. But you didn't stay silent." Iris reminded her. "Not when it mattered. Because you showed me I didn't have to." They stood together, watching people engage with art that had been hidden for over a century. The exhibition ran for 6 months. It broke attendance records. It sparked international conversations about gender bias in art history. It launched Iris's career in a way she never could have imagined. But more importantly, it changed the narrative. Museums around the world began reviewing their collections with new eyes. Researchers started investigating unsigned or misattributed works. The names of forgotten women artists began appearing in textbooks, auction catalogues, gallery walls. Iris received letters. Hundreds of them. From women who'd left careers to raise families. From people working job society deemed less than while carrying expertise no one acknowledged. From students who saw themselves in her story and dared to dream bigger. One letter in particular stayed with her. "Dear Miss Company." It was written in careful handwriting on lined paper. "I'm a janitor at a law firm. I have a degree in chemistry that I never got to use because of circumstances. Watching your story gave me the courage to reach out to a community college about teaching night classes. They said yes. I start next month. Thank you for showing me it's not too late." Iris kept that letter in her desk drawer. On hard days, she pulled it out and remembered why visibility mattered. Why representation mattered. Why telling the truth, even when it cost her everything, had been worth it. 2 years after the exhibition, Iris was offered the position of Director of Curatorial Studies at the National Gallery. She accepted. At 35 years old, she became one of the youngest people ever to hold the position. She used her platform to hire differently. To look for expertise in unconventional places. To give chances to people the art world typically overlooked. The staff she built was diverse in every sense. Different backgrounds. Different educational paths. Different lived experiences. And the work they did together was groundbreaking. But Iris never forgot where she came from. Once a month, she volunteered at a community center, teaching art authentication basics to anyone who wanted to learn. Janitors and security guards and home health aides who loved art but never thought they could be part of that world. She showed them craquelure patterns, taught them about aging techniques, explained how to identify styles and influences. She gave them the language to discuss what they saw. And sometimes, one of them would see something in a painting that Iris had missed. Some detail or technique or truth that was visible only from a particular angle of experience. In those moments, Iris remembered standing before a seascape in a gallery, her hands shaking, her voice trembling, speaking truth to power. She remembered being invisible and then choosing to be seen. And she understood that her story wasn't just about art or education or even justice. It was about the radical act of believing you have worth, even when the world tells you otherwise. It was about the courage to speak, even when your voice shakes. It was about the truth that dignity doesn't come from titles or wealth or positions. It comes from knowing who you are and refusing to be less than that, no matter what uniform life asks you to wear. If you've made it this far in the story, I need you to know something. Iris's journey is extraordinary, but the truth at its heart is universal. You are more than your circumstances, more than your job title, more than what others assume about you. Whatever dream you've deferred, whatever talent you've hidden, whatever voice you've silenced to survive, it's not too late to reclaim it. Subscribe to Tales of Desire with Mr. Walker if you believe in stories that remind us who we really are. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And comment below. Tell me what you're ready to step into. What are you ready to remember about yourself? Your story matters. Don't ever forget that. 5 years after that night at the Pembroke Gallery, Iris stood in her office at the National Gallery. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Her desk held research papers, authentication requests, exhibition proposals. On the wall hung a single framed photograph. Not the one of her younger self with paint-stained overalls, though she still had that too. This one was different. It showed a woman in a Navy security uniform standing before a small seascape painting, her hand raised, her mouth open in mid-speech. Someone had captured the exact moment she'd chosen to be visible. The exact moment everything changed. Beneath the photo, a small placard. A reminder. Dignity is not given. It is claimed. Her phone buzzed. A text from Eli, who now lived in a nearby accessible apartment with full-time care that Iris's salary easily covered. Lunch this week? I want to hear about the new exhibition. She smiled and typed back. Absolutely. I have so much to tell you. Another text came through, this one from James. He'd left security work 2 years ago, gone back to school himself, and was now completing a degree in social work. Just helped a client advocate for themselves in a meeting. Channeled my inner Iris company. Made me think of you. She responded with a heart emoji and a simple message. Proud of you. Because that was the thing about choosing to be visible, about speaking your truth even when it terrified you. It didn't just change your life. It gave permission to others to change theirs. The ripples spread in ways you couldn't predict, couldn't control, couldn't even always see. But they were there, moving through the world, transforming it one brave voice at a time. Iris turned back to her computer, pulling up the proposal for her next exhibition. Contemporary women artists, centered and celebrated. A show that wouldn't need to recover forgotten names because it would celebrate them now, while they were still creating. She began to type, her fingers moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why it mattered. Outside her window, the city moved through its afternoon. People rushing to meetings, to classes, to jobs that shaped their days. Some visible, some invisible. All of them carrying stories that deserved to be heard. And somewhere out there, Iris knew, someone was standing at their own crossroads. Facing their own moment of choice. Stay silent and stay safe. Or speak and risk everything. She hoped they'd choose to speak. Hoped her story would give them courage. Hoped they'd remember that the most valuable thing you can offer the world is not your compliance or your silence. It's your truth. Messy and imperfect and terrifyingly real. The sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Iris saved her work and gathered her things. She had dinner plans with Simone and Casey. 3 women from completely different backgrounds who'd found friendship in the wake of a scandal that had changed all their lives. As she locked her office door and walked down the hallway lined with masterpieces, Iris thought about the girl she'd been. The woman she'd become. The journey between them. It hadn't been easy. It had cost her sleep and security and years of her life. It had demanded sacrifices that sometimes still hurt to remember. But standing here now, in this place, doing this work, surrounded by beauty and truth and art that mattered, she wouldn't change a single step. Because the girl in the paint-stained overalls with impossible dreams hadn't been wrong. She'd just had to take the long way home. And sometimes, Iris thought as she stepped out into the evening air, the long way teaches you things the direct route never could. It teaches you resilience, compassion, the difference between performing expertise and living it, the value of invisible labor, the power of unexpected voices. It teaches you that worth is inherent, not earned. That dignity is a choice, not a gift. That truth spoken in a trembling voice is still truth. And it teaches you that it's never, ever too late to become who you were always meant to be. The woman in the security uniform is gone now, but she's not forgotten. She's part of the foundation, part of the story, part of the strength that carries Iris forward every single day. Because she was real too. She mattered too. She survived when surviving was the bravest thing she could do. And then, when the moment came, she found the courage to do more than survive. She reclaimed herself, her voice, her worth, her future, and in doing so, she changed the world. Not through wealth or power or privilege, but through the simple, revolutionary act of refusing to be less than she was. That refusal echoed through galleries and classrooms and community centers. Through scholarship funds and exhibitions and conversations that challenged centuries of assumptions. It echoed in the lives of people who saw her story and thought, if she can do it, maybe I can too. And that, Iris understood now, was the real masterpiece. Not any painting hanging on any wall, but the art of transformation, the beauty of second chances, the power of a life reclaimed. She walked home through the city as night fell, past galleries and museums, past people living their invisible lives, carrying their hidden expertise, waiting for their moment. And she smiled, knowing that somewhere, someone was about to find their voice, about to step into their light, about to remember who they really were. The story never really ends. It just keeps spreading. One brave soul at a time. One truth spoken. One life transformed. And it all started with a woman in a navy uniform, standing before a painting, choosing to speak even though her whole body shook with fear. Choosing to be seen. To be heard. To matter. Just like you can choose, right now, in whatever circumstances you're facing. Your voice matters. Your truth matters. You matter. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise. This is Iris Company's story. But in a way, it's all our stories. The story of everyone who's ever felt invisible, overlooked, underestimated. Everyone who's carried knowledge the world refused to see. Everyone who's sacrificed dreams to survive. If her journey moved you, if it reminded you of your own worth, do me a favor. Share this story. Leave a comment about what moment hit you hardest. Subscribe if you believe these stories change lives, because they do. One voice at a time. One truth spoken. One life reclaimed. Thank you for being here until the very end. Your presence matters more than you know. Now go out there and remember who you are. The world is waiting for your truth.